Sometimes the greatest mistake isn't making the wrong arrest. It's humiliating the right person in front of the wrong witnesses. The marble steps of the Jefferson Federal Courthouse gleamed beneath the pale October sun as attorneys hurried through the security entrance carrying leather briefcases and paper coffee cups, their conversations blending into the steady rhythm of another ordinary Thursday morning in downtown St. Louis. Television crews adjusted tripods near the entrance for a highly anticipated public corruption hearing scheduled to begin within the hour, while families, reporters, courthouse employees, and jurors streamed through the front doors under the quiet watch of security officers. Standing just outside the main entrance was a tall black man whose calm presence seemed untouched by the growing crowd around him. Nathaniel Brooks, 54 years old, wore a tailored navy suit beneath a neatly folded black judicial robe draped carefully over one arm, protecting it from the cool autumn breeze. His silver-flecked hair was trimmed close, his beard perfectly maintained, and his polished shoes reflected the courthouse columns with every measured step. He glanced briefly at the large courthouse clock mounted above the entrance. 8:52. He still had several minutes before proceedings would begin. He appreciated punctuality, not because anyone demanded it, but because he believed respect for the law often started with respect for time itself. Across the plaza, Officer Bradley Mercer watched him with narrowed eyes. Mercer had spent nearly 15 years wearing a badge, and confidence had slowly hardened into certainty. He believed experience allowed him to identify trouble before anyone else noticed it. This morning, his attention settled immediately on the unfamiliar man carrying what appeared to be a long black robe over expensive clothing. As Nathaniel approached the security checkpoint, Mercer stepped directly into his path. "Hold it," he said loudly enough that nearby conversations faded. Nathaniel stopped without hesitation, meeting the officer's gaze with quiet composure. "Good morning, officer," he replied evenly. "I'm heading inside." Mercer looked from the robe to Nathaniel's face before letting out a short laugh that carried farther than he intended. "Halloween came early this year?" he asked, gesturing toward the folded garment. "That's a pretty convincing judge costume." A few people nearby turned their heads. Some smiled awkwardly, unsure whether it was a joke. Others slowed their pace to watch. Nathaniel remained completely still. "It's not a costume," he answered calmly. "If you'll allow me to continue, I'm expected inside." Mercer folded his arms. Expected by who? Nathaniel's expression never changed. "The court." Mercer smirked as if he'd just heard the weakest excuse imaginable. "That's what they all say." He requested identification in a sharper tone, and Nathaniel reached slowly toward the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Before the wallet could fully emerge, Mercer raised a hand. "Don't." His voice echoed across the courthouse entrance. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Reporters instinctively lifted their cameras. Cell phones quietly appeared throughout the crowd. Nathaniel obeyed immediately, lowering his hands without complaint. He neither argued nor protested. His silence somehow made the moment heavier. Mercer stepped closer and picked up the folded black robe between two fingers as though inspecting a prop. "You really thought this would fool somebody?" he said with another dismissive chuckle. "I've seen better Halloween outfits at elementary school parades." Several uncomfortable faces turned away. Others kept recording. Nathaniel inhaled slowly, saying only, "Officer, I believe you're making a mistake." Mercer barely listened. Certain he had taken control of the situation, he reached for his radio to request courthouse supervision. But before anyone answered, the heavy oak doors behind them swung open, and the first person to step outside froze the instant their eyes landed on Nathaniel Brooks. The woman standing in the courthouse doorway did not raise her voice. She did not rush forward or create a scene. Instead, she stopped so suddenly that the thick case file tucked beneath her arm slipped slightly against her side. Emily Sutton, the courtroom clerk, assigned to courtroom 4, stared across the entrance plaza with widening eyes. She had spent nearly 7 years preparing dockets, organizing judicial schedules, and making certain every hearing began exactly on time. She knew every judge assigned to the federal courthouse, and she knew the man standing calmly in front of Officer Bradley Mercer better than almost anyone inside the building. For one brief moment, she wondered if she had somehow walked into the wrong courthouse. Then she spoke, almost to herself. "That cannot be happening." Her quiet words were lost beneath the growing murmur of spectators. but several courthouse employees noticed the expression on her face. They looked from Emily to Nathaniel Brooks and then back again. Confusion spread faster than conversation. Mercer, however, remained completely unaware. He interpreted the silence around him as agreement rather than disbelief. Keeping one hand near his radio, he looked directly at Nathaniel. "You still have not answered my question. Why are you carrying that rope?" Nathaniel's expression remained steady. "Because I will need it shortly." His voice carried neither frustration nor sarcasm. It was simply an honest answer. Mercer gave an amused shake of his head. "That is not how this works." He glanced toward the gathering crowd, almost inviting them to appreciate what he believed was an obvious deception. People cannot just walk around pretending to be federal judges. A few nervous laughs drifted through the plaza, but they disappeared almost immediately. Emily took 2 cautious steps forward before stopping again. She knew exactly what she wanted to say, yet something held her back. Courthouse protocol required security officers to manage access at the entrance, and interrupting them publicly could create even greater confusion. Still, every passing second made her more uneasy. At that exact moment, one of the local television photographers quietly lowered his camera. Instead of filming the scheduled corruption hearing, he zoomed in on Nathaniel's face. Something about the man's remarkable composure did not fit the situation unfolding before him. The photographer whispered to the reporter beside him, "Have we seen him before?" The reporter studied Nathaniel for several seconds, but could not immediately place him. Meanwhile, Mercer extended his hand. "Identification." Nathaniel nodded politely. "May I retrieve it now?" Slowly, Mercer answered. Nathaniel carefully removed a slim leather wallet and presented a government identification card without argument. Mercer glanced at it for barely a second before lowering it again. His eyes never reached the official seal near the top, because he had already convinced himself the document could not possibly be genuine. "Nice print job," he muttered dismissively. Nathaniel did not respond. Instead, he looked briefly toward the courthouse entrance where Emily now stood frozen beside the open doors. Their eyes met for only an instant. She recognized the subtle expression immediately. He was not asking for help. He was asking everyone to remain calm. That silent exchange lasted less than 2 seconds, yet it changed everything for Emily. She reached discreetly into her jacket pocket and unlocked her courthouse phone. Without taking her eyes off the scene, she pressed a single speed dial reserved for internal judicial administration. Across the plaza, Mercer handed the identification card back with a confident smile that suggested the matter had already been decided in his mind. Then the radio clipped to his shoulder crackled unexpectedly, and the first words that came through caused the color to fade from Emily Sutton's face before anyone else understood why. The burst of static from Officer Bradley Mercer's shoulder radio silenced nearly every conversation within earshot. He pressed the transmit button with the confidence of someone expecting routine confirmation. Instead, an unfamiliar dispatcher spoke in a measured voice. "Officer Mercer, Judicial Administration is requesting an immediate status update regarding an individual outside the main entrance." Mercer glanced toward Nathaniel Brooks before answering. "Possible impersonation. Male subject claims to be connected with the court. Situation is under control." Nathaniel remained exactly where he was, his hands relaxed at his sides, his folded judicial robe still resting neatly across one arm. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He simply watched the courthouse entrance as though he understood something no one else did. Around them, more courthouse employees quietly gathered near the lobby windows. Lawyers arriving for the morning docket slowed their pace. Several jurors exchanged uncertain looks after noticing that even experienced court staff appeared unusually tense. Imagine standing there while strangers quietly formed opinions about who you were before hearing a single fact. Imagine knowing the truth could clear everything in an instant, yet choosing patience because dignity mattered more than winning an argument. Nathaniel had spent decades serving the law. He knew respect could never be demanded through anger. It had to survive moments exactly like this one. Mercer, however, interpreted that silence as hesitation. "You have had every opportunity to explain yourself," he said firmly. "Instead, you keep giving vague answers." Nathaniel met his eyes. "I have answered every question honestly." "Then tell me why nobody has confirmed your story." Nathaniel glanced briefly toward the courthouse doors before replying. Because the people who can answer are only now learning there is a question. Mercer frowned, clearly dissatisfied. Before he could respond, Bailiff Marcus Delgado emerged from a side security corridor carrying a folder for the upcoming hearing. He stopped several yards away after recognizing Nathaniel immediately. Years of courtroom discipline kept his expression controlled, but a flicker of disbelief crossed his face. Marcus looked from the Robe to Mercer, then back to Nathaniel. For a brief second it seemed as though he might speak. Instead, he quietly reached for his own courthouse radio without taking another step. That single movement did not escape Emily Sutton. Standing inside the entrance, she realized she was no longer the only employee who understood something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. The casual curiosity that had surrounded the encounter was beginning to disappear, replaced by a nervous uncertainty. Even the television reporter lowered her microphone. Sensing the story unfolding before her was very different from the corruption hearing she had arrived to cover. Mercer noticed none of it. He believed the growing crowd validated his authority rather than questioned it. "I am going to ask one final time," he said. "Who exactly are you supposed to be?" Nathaniel answered without raising his voice. "I am exactly who my identification says I am." Mercer gave a short, dismissive smile and shook his head. "That answer is not going to help you today." At that exact moment, the courthouse clock struck 9 o'clock. The deep chime echoed across the marble plaza, followed almost immediately by another sound. A pair of polished footsteps approached from inside the courthouse with calm, deliberate precision. Every clerk, attorney, and bailiff near the entrance instinctively turned toward the hallway. Officer Mercer was the only person who did not, because he was still looking directly at Nathaniel Brooks when a composed voice from behind him quietly spoke his name. Officer Bradley Mercer turned slowly toward the voice, the confidence on his face softening only slightly as he found Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore standing a few feet behind him. Dressed in her black judicial robe, her silver hair neatly gathered above a composed expression, she carried herself with the unmistakable authority that years on the federal bench had earned. The conversations across the courthouse plaza disappeared almost instantly. Even the television crews lowered their microphones. Judge Whitmore looked first at Nathaniel Brooks, then at the folded robe resting over his arm, before finally meeting Mercer's eyes. "Officer," she said calmly, "would you please explain what is happening?" Mercer straightened his posture. "Your Honor, this individual presented himself as someone connected to the court while carrying judicial attire. I am verifying his identity before allowing access to the building." Nathaniel remained silent. He neither interrupted nor attempted to answer for himself. Judge Whitmore noticed that detail immediately. She had presided over thousands of proceedings and knew that truly composed people rarely rushed to defend themselves in moments of misunderstanding. Mercer, believing he was demonstrating professionalism, continued. "He also presented identification that appears questionable." Nathaniel spoke for the first time since she arrived. "Your Honor, I provided the same credentials that judicial administration issued to me." His tone remained respectful and measured. Judge Whitmore nodded once without commenting, then extended her hand toward Mercer. "May I see the identification?" Mercer hesitated for only a fraction of a second before passing it over. She examined the card carefully, unlike Mercer, whose eyes had barely lingered on it. Her expression did not change, but Emily Sutton noticed something important. Judge Whitmore looked at the identification, then briefly at Nathaniel, as though confirming something she already knew. Across the entrance plaza, the crowd sensed the shift. The laughter had disappeared completely. Reporters exchanged uncertain glances. Several attorneys quietly whispered among themselves, recognizing that whatever had begun as an ordinary security stop had become something far more significant. Imagine watching an entire crowd slowly realize that the person they had doubted might have been telling the truth from the very beginning. Sometimes the loudest moment is not when someone speaks. It is when everyone else stops. Judge Whitmore returned the identification without making any announcement. Instead, she asked Mercer a simple question. "Officer, when you received these credentials, did you verify them through judicial administration?" Mercer cleared his throat. "I believe the circumstances justified immediate action. That was not my question." Her voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable weight. Mercer shifted slightly before answering. "No, Your Honor. A silence settled over the plaza. Nathaniel continued standing with the same quiet dignity he had shown since the first moment Mercer approached him. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no resentment, only patience. Bailiff Marcus Delgado watched from several yards away, his radio still in his hand, waiting for instructions that had not yet come. Emily Sutton noticed another courthouse employee hurrying through the lobby carrying a thick scheduling binder. She recognized him immediately as the administrator responsible for coordinating every federal courtroom assignment that morning. The moment he stepped outside and saw Nathaniel Brooks, he came to an abrupt stop. His face lost all color. Before anyone could ask why, he looked directly at Chief Judge Whitmore and quietly said, "Your Honor, the courtroom has been waiting for Judge Brooks to begin the hearing for the last 5 minutes." The administrator's words settled over the courthouse plaza like a sudden change in the weather. No one reacted immediately because the meaning took several seconds to reach everyone standing there. Courtroom 4 had not been waiting for an attorney or a witness. It had been waiting for the presiding judge. Officer Bradley Mercer looked from the administrator to Nathaniel Brooks, searching for some sign that the statement had been exaggerated or misunderstood. He found none. Nathaniel stood exactly as he had since the encounter began, his folded judicial robe still resting neatly across his arm, his expression composed, his breathing steady. Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore accepted the scheduling binder from the administrator without speaking. She opened it carefully, turning several pages until she reached the day's docket. Her finger stopped beside one line before she quietly closed the binder again. "The schedule is correct," she said. "Judge Brooks has been assigned to today's hearing for several weeks." Around them, courthouse employees exchanged uneasy glances. Emily Sutton lowered her eyes for a moment, remembering how she had prepared Nathaniel's courtroom before sunrise, arranging exhibits, checking microphones, and placing the case files in perfect order. Every chair inside courtroom 4 had been ready. Every attorney had arrived on time. Only one person had been missing. Imagine spending your entire career earning respect through fairness, only to have strangers question whether you even belonged in the building where you served. That was the quiet burden Nathaniel carried without allowing bitterness to show. He knew that dignity was not measured by how others treated him. It was measured by how faithfully he upheld his own character when they did not. The television reporter who had been covering the corruption hearing slowly lowered her notebook. Her producer whispered through an earpiece, urging her to continue recording because something much larger than the scheduled trial appeared to be unfolding. Nearby, several jurors waiting to enter the courthouse watched silently, their expressions changing from curiosity to discomfort as the full picture slowly emerged. Bailiff Marcus Delgado finally stepped forward, stopping respectfully beside Judge Whitmore. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "Courtroom 4 is fully assembled. Counsel for both sides has been asking whether Judge Brooks has been delayed by traffic." Judge Whitmore answered without taking her eyes off Nathaniel. "No, traffic was not the reason." Mercer swallowed hard. For the first time that morning, uncertainty replaced certainty. He replayed the conversation in his mind, remembering the identification card, the calm answers, the robe he had dismissed, and the simple statement Nathaniel had repeated more than once. "I am expected inside." Every word had been true. Yet Nathaniel had never once demanded special treatment or announced his title. He had simply answered the questions placed before him. That realization settled heavily over the entrance plaza. Emily noticed another detail that made the situation even more significant. Several security cameras positioned above the courthouse doors had been recording continuously since before 8:30 that morning. Every exchange, every remark, every decision had been captured from multiple angles as part of the courthouse's standard security system. She looked toward the monitors visible through the lobby window and quietly understood that no one would have to rely on memory alone. Chief Judge Whitmore took one measured step toward Nathaniel before speaking with unmistakable respect. "Judge Brooks," she said, "I believe the court owes you an apology." Before Nathaniel could answer, another voice echoed from inside the courthouse. "Your Honor," a judicial marshal called. "Urgently, the administrative office in Washington is on the secure line. They are asking to speak with both of you immediately." The request from Washington immediately changed the atmosphere inside the courthouse. Conversation stopped. Reporters looked toward the entrance, hoping to understand why the administrative office would become involved in what had begun as a routine security encounter. Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore gave a slight nod to the judicial marshal before turning back to Nathaniel Brooks. "Judge Brooks," she said quietly, "would you join me inside for just a moment?" Nathaniel answered with the same calm voice that had never wavered. "Of course, Your Honor." He lifted the folded judicial robe slightly, preparing to continue toward the courthouse entrance exactly as he had intended from the beginning. No triumph crossed his face. No satisfaction appeared in his eyes. If anything, there was only quiet disappointment that the morning had unfolded this way. Officer Bradley Mercer stepped aside without being asked. The certainty that had guided every decision only minutes earlier had been replaced by growing unease. He watched Nathaniel walk past him with measured dignity, wondering how many opportunities he had ignored to slow down, verify the facts, and simply listen. Imagine realizing that every assumption you made had been built on appearances instead of evidence. Imagine understanding that respect is easiest to demand from others and hardest to practice yourself. That lesson was beginning to settle over everyone who had witnessed the encounter. As Nathaniel crossed the threshold into the courthouse, Emily Sutton hurried ahead to open the courtroom corridor, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is ready for you, Judge Brooks." Nathaniel offered her a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Emily. None of this is your fault." Those simple words stopped her in her tracks. After everything that had happened, he had chosen to ease someone else's burden instead of speaking about his own humiliation. Nearby, Bailiff Marcus Delgado quietly instructed courthouse staff to guide jurors and visitors back toward their assigned waiting areas so the morning calendar could proceed with as little disruption as possible. The building slowly returned to motion, but the emotional weight remained. Every employee seemed more aware than ever that justice depended not only on courtroom decisions, but also on how every person was treated before ever reaching the courtroom doors. Halfway down the marble corridor, the judicial marshal met Judge Whitmore and Nathaniel outside a secure conference room. "The line is ready," he said respectfully. "Washington has requested a confidential briefing." Judge Whitmore entered first, followed by Nathaniel. The door remained slightly open as Mercer stood several yards away, uncertain whether to leave or wait for further instructions. Seconds later, the muffled voice of a senior administrator came through the conference room speaker. "Chief Judge Whitmore, thank you for responding so quickly. We have already been informed that this morning's incident was captured by courthouse security systems as well as multiple members of the news media. We are requesting that all available recordings be preserved immediately under federal evidence retention procedures." Emily exchanged a glance with Marcus. Neither of them had expected the matter to move so quickly beyond the courthouse itself. Judge Whitmore answered firmly, "The recordings will be preserved without exception." There was a brief pause before the administrator continued. "There is one additional matter. Judge Brooks was scheduled to receive an announcement immediately before this morning's hearing. In light of today's events, we believe he should hear it now." Nathaniel looked toward the conference room speaker with quiet curiosity. Even he had not been told what the announcement would be. Then the administrator took a slow breath and began reading the official statement. And before the first sentence was finished, Chief Judge Whitmore's expression changed completely. The conference room fell completely silent as the senior administrator continued reading from the official memorandum. By unanimous recommendation of the Judicial Council and pending the formal public ceremony next month, Judge Nathaniel Brooks has been selected to serve as the next Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri. No one spoke. Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore slowly lowered her eyes before looking back at Nathaniel with unmistakable pride. The announcement had been confidential for weeks. Only a handful of senior officials across the federal judiciary had known the decision before that morning. Nathaniel himself had been instructed to arrive early because the administrative office wanted to inform him privately before the courthouse opened to the public. Instead, the first minutes of what should have been one of the greatest mornings of his career had unfolded beneath suspicion and public embarrassment. Yet even after hearing the announcement, Nathaniel's expression barely changed. He thanked the administrator with quiet sincerity. "I am honored by the confidence the council has placed in me. I hope to continue serving with fairness and humility." There was no celebration in his voice, no victory, only gratitude mixed with the weight of responsibility. Outside the conference room, Officer Bradley Mercer remained near the corridor, unaware of the exact conversation, but increasingly conscious that every courthouse employee who walked past him now carried the same uneasy expression. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others acknowledged him politely before continuing down the hallway. The atmosphere was not hostile. It was heavier than that. It was the quiet realization that something preventable had happened because assumptions had replaced verification. Imagine working your entire life to earn the privilege of wearing a robe that represents impartial justice, only to have someone dismiss it as nothing more than a costume. The robe itself carried no power. The power came from the principles behind it. Respect for every person. Careful judgment. Patience before conclusions. Those values could not be stitched into fabric, but they could certainly be forgotten. As the conference call concluded, Judge Whitmore thanked the administrator and assured him that the scheduled proceedings would continue without unnecessary delay. Before ending the call, the administrator added one final request. Chief Judge Whitmore, please remind everyone involved that this review is not about assigning blame before facts are established. Our responsibility is to understand exactly what occurred and to strengthen public trust through transparency. That will be done, she answered. When the line disconnected, Nathaniel reached for the folded robe he had carried since arriving at the courthouse. With slow, deliberate movements, he placed it over his shoulders and adjusted the front with practiced care. The transformation was subtle. He looked exactly as he had before, yet the room itself seemed to recognize the significance of the garment in a way it had not only minutes earlier. Emily Sutton quietly opened the conference room door. Beyond it, the marble corridor stretched toward courtroom 4 where attorneys, witnesses, jurors, and members of the public were still waiting. Bailiff Marcus Delgado stood ready beside the courtroom entrance. As Nathaniel approached, Marcus nodded respectfully and opened the courtroom doors. Every person inside immediately rose to their feet. The room became perfectly still. At the opposite end of the corridor, Officer Bradley Mercer witnessed the entire scene from a distance. It was the first time he fully understood that the robe he had mocked was not a disguise, but the visible symbol of a responsibility that Nathaniel Brooks had carried with dignity long before either of them had arrived that morning. Just as Nathaniel prepared to step through the doorway and begin the delayed hearing, a courthouse deputy hurried toward Judge Whitmore, holding a sealed envelope marked for immediate delivery, and the words printed across the front caused her to stop mid-step. Internal Affairs Review Notice. Judge Nathaniel Brooks entered courtroom 4 with the same quiet composure he had carried throughout the morning, and every person remained standing until he reached the bench. The familiar room felt different now. The polished oak walls, the American flag beside the bench, the neatly arranged exhibits, and the rows of waiting attorneys all reflected the order that the justice system depended upon, yet Nathaniel understood that trust in. That system was built long before a judge ever struck a gavel. It began with how people were treated at the courthouse door. He thanked everyone for their patience before taking his seat and calmly explained that an unexpected administrative matter had delayed the proceedings. He did not mention the encounter outside. He did not criticize anyone. He simply acknowledged the delay and immediately turned his attention to the case before him. The attorneys exchanged brief glances, surprised by both his professionalism and his restraint. Meanwhile, in a conference room only a short distance away, Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore carefully opened the sealed envelope delivered by the courthouse deputy. Emily Sutton and Bailiff Marcus Delgado stood nearby as silent witnesses while she reviewed the first page. The document confirmed that an independent administrative review had already been initiated under standard accountability procedures. Every available security recording, radio transmission, and written report from the morning would be collected and examined. The purpose, the memorandum explained, was not to presume wrongdoing but to determine whether established procedures had been followed and whether additional training or corrective action would be appropriate. Imagine hearing that your every decision from only an hour earlier would now be reviewed frame by frame, word by word, not by angry strangers, but by people whose only responsibility was to uncover the truth. That realization settled heavily over everyone who read the notice. Officer Bradley Mercer sat quietly in a nearby administrative office after being instructed to complete a detailed incident report while events remained fresh in his memory. For the first time since beginning his shift, He replayed the conversation exactly as it had happened instead of the way he had initially justified it to himself. Nathaniel had answered every question respectfully. He had moved only when instructed. He had presented official identification without hesitation. He had never claimed special treatment. The realization was uncomfortable because it forced Mercer to confront not simply one mistaken decision, but the assumptions that had shaped it. Halfway through writing his report, he stopped typing and stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. One sentence from that morning echoed louder than all the others. "It is not a costume." At the time, Mercer had dismissed those words with a laugh. Now they carried an entirely different meaning. Back inside the courtroom, Nathaniel listened carefully as attorneys presented preliminary arguments. His questions were thoughtful, balanced, and measured, exactly as they had been throughout his career. No observer would have guessed that only minutes earlier he had stood outside the same building being questioned about whether he belonged there at all. Emily quietly watched through the courtroom window before returning to her desk. She realized that real authority did not become stronger when challenged. It became more visible through calm restraint. Just as the morning hearing reached its first scheduled recess, a courthouse deputy entered quietly and handed bailiff Marcus Delgado a small folded note marked for Judge Brooks alone. Marcus read the sender's name, paused for a brief moment, and then walked toward the bench with an expression that suggested the next conversation would be even more important than the last. Judge Nathaniel Brooks accepted the folded note from bailiff Marcus Delgado and read it quietly before placing it beside the case file. The message was brief. Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore requested a private meeting immediately after the morning session concluded. Nathaniel simply nodded and resumed the hearing with the same steady focus that had guided every decision throughout his career. The attorneys completed their arguments. Witnesses answered questions respectfully, and every ruling reflected the same careful balance that had earned Nathaniel the confidence of colleagues across the federal judiciary. When the proceedings recessed shortly before noon, the courtroom slowly emptied. Jurors returned to the assembly room, attorneys gathered their files, and members of the public filtered into the hallway. Many glanced back toward the bench one last time, not because of the legal arguments they had heard, but because they had quietly learned what had happened before court ever began. Nathaniel stepped down from the bench, removed his reading glasses, and met Chief Judge Eleanor Whitmore in her office overlooking the courthouse plaza. Through the large windows, they could see people moving across the same marble entrance where the morning's misunderstanding had unfolded. The scene now appeared ordinary again, yet both of them understood that ordinary moments often carried the greatest lessons. Judge Whitmore placed a folder on the desk. "The administrative office has confirmed that the independent review will proceed according to standard policy," she said. "The purpose is accountability, not embarrassment. Every fact will be examined fairly." Nathaniel nodded. "That is exactly how it should be." She studied him for a moment before asking the question that had remained unspoken all morning. "Would you like to make a public statement?" Nathaniel walked toward the window before answering. "Only if it reminds people that every person deserves to be treated with patience before conclusions are reached. If my experience can strengthen that principle, then it is worth discussing. If it only humiliates someone else, it serves no lasting purpose. Imagine carrying enough authority to demand revenge, yet choosing responsibility instead. That choice does not erase what happened. It simply refuses to let bitterness write the ending." Later that afternoon, Officer Bradley Mercer requested an opportunity to speak privately with Nathaniel. The meeting lasted only a few minutes inside a quiet conference room. Mercer stood respectfully, no longer protected by certainty, only by honesty. "Judge Brooks," he began, "I made assumptions before I gathered the facts. I did not give you the fairness that my position requires. I regret that." Nathaniel listened without interruption. After a brief silence, he replied, "Accountability begins when someone is willing to face the truth without excuses. I hope today becomes a lesson that stays with both of us." Mercer lowered his head slightly. "It will." There were no raised voices, no dramatic speeches, and no celebration. Only two men acknowledging that trust in justice depends upon humility as much as authority. As the afternoon sun stretched across the courthouse steps, Emily Sutton watched courthouse employees return to their routines. The cameras had been packed away. The crowds had dispersed. Cases continued. Life inside the courthouse moved forward exactly as it should. Yet something had changed in the hearts of many who had witnessed the morning unfold. They had seen how quickly appearances could mislead and how quietly dignity could overcome humiliation. Nathaniel Brooks walked through the courthouse one final time before leaving for the day, his judicial robe folded neatly over his arm just as it had been that morning. This time no one questioned why he carried it. They understood what it represented. Not privilege, not status, responsibility. Because a badge may grant authority, and a robe may symbolize the law, but neither has meaning without the discipline to see the person before the appearance. And in the end, the strongest voice inside that courthouse was never the loudest one. It was the quiet truth that waited patiently until everyone else was finally ready to hear it.